We are also starting with some reaction to a new OIG report on Chicago public schools, specifically their spending on travel. It was eye-opening, to say the least, and Illinois State Comptroller Susana Mendoza has had plenty to say about it online, so we asked that she would join me here live. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me.
I really appreciate it. So many people, like I said, it's eye-opening, maybe to say the least. Let me kind of go through this here. You made a post that said $500 million of rated TIF funds meant for constructing, repairing schools and school infrastructure are going to CPS to fund the CTU's latest contract and pay for pensions. Oh, and for safaris and balloon rides. Just remember this when they say it's for the kids. But it is worth noting that in a letter to staff, Interim District CEO Macklin King and Treasurer Walter Stock announced in response to the Inspector General's findings that the district imposed a freeze on nearly all staff travel unrelated to student activities this fall and formed a committee to come up with better travel approval procedures and controls. Also, they believe a new financial system that the district is currently rolling out will be better at flagging travel expenses that exceed district limits or mismatches between pre-approved and actual spending. So let's break apart your thoughts on the issues and how they're at least appearing to try to correct them and address them. Your thoughts?
Sure. Well, I'm thankful Inspector General actually doing this report, because otherwise taxpayers wouldn't know that it's happening right under their nose. I do think that people constantly worry, of course, about how their money is being spent. And we always hear about how especially the Chicago Teachers Union is continuously, asking Springfield and asking taxpayers to pay more. Yet when we find out that $7.7, almost $8 million were spent on travel that wasn't at all related to actually improving the education of our kids, but instead went to things like safaris and hot air balloon rides, it should infuriate any parent out there. We do need more special ed teachers, but if you can think about the fact that $7.7 million in wasted taxpayer money for balloon rides and looking at giraffes and elephants could have gone to hiring 100 of those special ed teachers. These are the questions that we need to be asking. Why has this money been spent this way? I'm glad to see that there will be protections put in place moving forward. But before you come ask for more money, I think that it's important that the CPS acknowledge how they're spending the money and prove that they're worthy of the dollars that are being spent their way. Those dollars should be spent on children and what's best for them, not on these superfluous expenditures.
Yeah, so there's the travel aspect of it, and then there's the CTU aspect of it when it comes to pensions. Talk a little bit about that, because it feels like that is a continuous conversation that keeps coming up, whether these pensions should be fully funded by the city, how the state addresses them, and so forth.
Well, I think that the way that the pension law is written, the city is responsible, in fact, for that payment. I know that the mayor has wanted to push that on to the board to pay, and was supportive of taking out a high interest payday loan, essentially, to pay for that. It's the reason why his original board revolted and essentially resigned en masse. He hired a new board, essentially, appointed the majority of the board, who everyone assumed would also stick with the mayor on this and pass this payday loan. But even they realized this is atrocious governance. And so they thankfully rejected that loan as well. And I think one of the things that I tried to bring attention to is that we're hearing right now during the budget plan, the mayor's plan is to sweep $1 billion worth of TIF dollars that are coming out of minority neighborhoods primarily to be utilized for plugging budget holes, including this very expensive contract negotiation that we don't have enough money to pay, and that CPS has said they don't have enough money to pay. So it's important that people know that once economic development dollars that are part of these TIF funds in places like Inglewood or Boston are removed from those communities will not see development happen for the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years. That's the opposite of what we should be doing. We need to be building up our communities, investing in them. That helps all of the children of Chicago, and it helps to have strong neighborhoods with more people paying property taxes instead of less people paying more in property taxes. But when these dollars get spent, instead of in lifting up our communities and building them, they get spent to plug budget holes and to pay for pensions that, again, that is not the purpose of how these dollars should be spent. We will have to acknowledge that those communities will remain underinvested in, and that those dollars can never be spent on anything else, including new schools or repairs for the bricks and mortar that those dollars should be there for. So it's irresponsible, and I think it needs to be called out. And most importantly, we need to educate the public as to what are the purpose of these TIF funds and how they are being abused. Because Chicago is the only municipality in Illinois that uses TIF funds as slush funds for operating expenses. That's not their intended purpose.
And I guess a lot of people would see, obviously everyone should know how the money is being spent, but you're wondering how money is being moved around at a time when we've also talked extensively about layoffs and shortfalls as well.
Well, yes, and we've seen that the mayor is refusing to even look at all internally and say, how can the city of Chicago trim its budget? Make sure that we're creating efficiencies where we can. As controller, I have heard them come to Springfield. The governor has, the legislature has, asking for more money, yet unwilling to show how they're spending theirs. It's been 4 years since we've seen an audit from the Chicago Teachers Union, yet they come asking for more at a time where we have seen the results of how they're educating our children be worse than ever. So these are important questions to be asking. The state of Illinois also has very limited resources for an unlimited number of requests. And I think it's fair on behalf of taxpayers to ask for accountability on how we're spending our money. We should be investing in our kids. We should be repairing our schools. We should be fixing the bricks and mortars and adding playgrounds to schools that don't have them or that are run down. But we can't use those dollars if the city of Chicago, in fact, takes them to use them for operating expenses. For every $1, for example, of TIF funds that come out of the Inglewood TIF, the city of Chicago only gets 23 cents on that. The Chicago Public Schools get 50 cents. And for example, Cook County gets 14 cents, even if they don't need it. So by sweeping $1 billion in economic development dollars meant for new schools, for repaired roads and bridges, for new economic development, for affordable housing, for things like new grocery stores in underserved communities, by taking that money, we're never going to see those things in those underserved communities. The school children, if they get a leak in their roof, you better hope there's a bucket nearby, because the money that's supposed to go to fix the roof has been spent on overspending by the city of Chicago. These are the things that people need to know are happening right under their nose, especially as these proposals move forward in city council. Yeah, let's hope they don't.
You bring up the issue of TIF funds and how they're being spent, but also speak of limited resources. There's also the issue of COVID funds and how this factors into both things with the CPS, but really throughout the city.
Well, the problem is that, for example, the state of Illinois did a very good job. We managed the COVID funds extremely responsibly. In fact, even during the darkest days of the pandemic, I created a COVID transparency portal that has been recognized nationally as the gold standard in transparency reporting. I want everyone to know how we spent every penny of COVID funds down to the individual glove. And we only use COVID funds for one-time expenditures. We knew that it was absolutely fiscally reckless to spend one-time COVID dollars on long-term recurring expenses. The city of Chicago did the complete opposite. They leveraged the federal dollars that came in for COVID to hire a bunch of new people, to create new programs that would be recurring programs, in the hopes that once the money ran out, that there would be so much pressure to keep those programs and to keep those employees on staff that, things like property tax increases or new additional taxes like what they're asking for now, the corporate head tax, which is a job killer in and of itself, or sweeping of TIF funds to keep these jobs in place, or to keep the spending in place that should have never been done in a recurring fashion. It was a very irresponsible use of one-time funds for the city of Chicago as compared to a very responsible use of one-time funds for the state of Illinois. Those funds are gone. So we should never have been in a position where the city of Chicago added so many new long-term programs, added so many new jobs, when they knew that that was not what they were supposed to do with that money.
Yeah, and some of that, of course, predates Mayor Johnson. So do you think that this is evidence of widespread issues that go much further than CPS?
Well, like I said, we're seeing this just specifically in the city of Chicago, which is really unfortunate because it is the economic driver of the state of Illinois. I started by talking about TIF funds and how they're being swept by the city of Chicago. My office, the Illinois Office of Controller, is actually responsible for reporting the TIF expenditures of all of the different municipalities and TIFs that are created across the state of Illinois. But the only municipality who uses TIF funds as a slush fund for operating expenditures, so not related to economic development, takes from the TIF funds to pay down bills that have nothing to do with economic development. The only municipality in the state that does that is the city of Chicago. So yes, that's why the onus has to be on what is happening in the city? How are we looking at this irresponsible spending, whether it's COVID dollars being spent not the way they're supposed to be, or whether it's TIF funds being swept, whether these taxes that want to be imposed by the city are even necessary. These are the questions that need to be asked, especially right now as the city is considering passing additional taxes on the people of Chicago without showing that there's no other option, that they've tried everything else, including showing us how they're spending our money wisely, but also showing that they're willing to create efficiencies and make cuts of programs that shouldn't have been, or not necessarily programs, but I would say the cuts to the initiatives that they started that were supposed to only be started and live through the actual COVID dollars running out. We can't continue to, let me just be clear, in 2019, since then, which is pre-COVID, the budget has expanded by over 60% in the city of Chicago. Not 16, 60%, 60. So that should have never happened. It's unfortunately what the new reality is. But I think that the city council is going to have a difficult job trying to figure out how to go back to the days where we were managing the budget somewhat more responsibly, but they're completely out of control today, and that needs to be fixed.
Yeah, so looking forward here at how things do get fixed, I want to ask you, you're obviously finishing out your third term in your current seat. Have you made a decision about whether you're going to run for mayor or not?
I am, as I said before, very concerned about what's happening in the city of Chicago. I'm not closing the door on that possibility, but I think right now what I can do my job as controller for the state of Illinois is to shine some light on what is actually happening from a financial dysfunction perspective with our state's #1 economic driver. All of the hard work that my team and I have done over the last 9 years to get Illinois' finances stabilized to help the people of our state is to put Illinois in a position where we can be ready for our growth spurt. All of that is being compromised by the financial disarray that we see every day, only getting worse, frankly, in the city of Chicago. So I'm going to leave that door open, but right now my hands are full with trying to shine light on what's happening so that people know what it is that their aldermen are going to be voting on and how terrible these policies are to seeing Chicago be in a position for economic growth.
So let me ask you, what types of reform then do you think are necessary to actually change these things, to move beyond shining the light, but actually changing it?
That's a great question, and thank you for asking it. I'm actually in the process right now of looking at putting together legislation that would create reforms to the TIFs. For example, not allowing municipalities to use TIF dollars to plug operating budget deficits or budget holes. That's kind of like paying your mortgage with your credit card. It was not the intended use of how you're supposed to be paying those bills. So in order to protect taxpayers, primarily the most disenfranchised folks in our city of Chicago, which are the Black and brown communities, those are the folks who need the grocery stores. The African American community does not need to continue for the next 20 to 30 years to have to leave their neighborhoods to find a grocery store. That is not providing equity or justice to those folks. It's actually cruel. And so when we have these dollars that are ready for development in those communities and they're being taken to be spent on plugging budget holes, by the way, in the name of serving those very communities, we're doing them a disservice. And I think we need to just speak truth to what's happening and stop the raiding of these funds. Chicago should never have started it. They did. They've continued it, but it's been put on steroids, and it needs to stop. So I will be looking forward to really introducing some additional TIF transparency reforms, but also not allowing these types of raids to happen in the future, no matter who the mayor is.
Yeah, and of course, Mayor Johnson has kind of said that for those who bring up his policies as maybe being fiscally reckless, he feels like it's a bit of a dog whistle, quite honestly. So do you not think that anyone, whether it was you or anybody else who does push for systemic change, transparency, as you're saying, would get a little backlash for that?
For what specifically?
For systemic change. Like the ideas that you have would essentially amount to systemic change. If you're trying to change the TIF funds, that's systemic change. Do you not think anyone in any position who really pushes for systemic change would get some backlash?
Of course, you always do. I mean, when I was having to introduce systemic change to the state of Illinois' finances, I got pushback. I mean, Governor Rauner and I fought about this all the time. He vetoed my most important transparency reform, which was called the Debt Transparency Act, which, by the way, has been integral in earning our very first credit upgrade, and it has been talked about in subsequent credit upgrades. But the governor opposed me on that, and I had to convince the legislature that this was absolutely necessary to turning around Illinois' finances. And I was able to override the governor's veto of that critical piece of legislation and several others that he also vetoed that we were able to win. And that wasn't a win for me, it was a win for Illinois taxpayers. And it was instrumental in turning around our state's finances and earning now on my watch 10 credit upgrades. So I know, have earned the trust of the taxpayers in delivering for them. And that is why it breaks my heart to see what's happening in Chicago. While Illinois just 2 weeks ago got our 10th credit upgrade, Chicago just last week was put on a negative watch. They are this close to their next downgrade, which will put them just one notch above junk bond status. So clearly something has to change, but I think the most important thing to do is to try to pass systemic reforms, even in the face of people, crying that they're not ready for them or that they should be able to dip into the cookie jar to pay for their irresponsible spending. No, they shouldn't. We need to learn to live within our means. We need to learn that when we have better than expected revenues or revenue growth, we should put that towards savings, and we should put it towards paying down things like our pensions, and put it towards programs that will give us a proven return on investment. We've been doing that for Illinois, but Chicago needs to catch up. But certainly if they're not, and if they're moving in the opposite direction, as your state controller who represents every single taxpayer in Chicago, but also those across the entire state, it's my job and obligation to shine a light on that, and then not just talk about it and complain about it, but like I said, introduce measures at the state level that could hopefully stop and curb some of this reckless spending.
Illinois State Comptroller Susana Mendoza, thank you so much for your time on this Friday.
Thanks for having me. And I encourage everyone to reach out to their aldermen and ask them to please not allow for these measures to be passed, like the corporate head tax, which is a job killer, or the rating of the TIF funds, which will hurt the most needy communities be able to ever develop into the type of city and neighborhoods we should really want for Illinois and Chicago.
Okay, thank you so much. Appreciate it. And the governor has echoed her words in terms of not being on board for that corporate head tax either. But it is something that has been pushed in Mayor Johnson's upcoming budget that he is trying to get across to the city council right now. They have been meeting today.